much to Conversations. It's a real pleasure to welcome you. It was great to see you the other night of that demo. It was really good. We had a good talk, and looking forward to this. And welcome very much.
Thank you.
And in the audience, we welcome to the program Omowale Clay, and he's a person. He's billed on the graphic as a part of the International Secretariat of the December 12th movement. Yes. And he's also billed as associated with a movement or a view, Friends of Zimbabwe. We have those two things up for you. But I wonder if you could share with me and with the audience your background. This is in a very real sense going to be the Clay Hour. And your own background, born and raised a little bit, and then we'll wade into a discussion about the human condition and human rights and that sort of thing. But could you share your own background, born and raised, educated a little bit, please?
Born and raised in New York City.
Okay.
My mother was from Greenville, Alabama. She's passed. My father was from Indianola, Mississippi, the home of B.B. King. Both have passed. Yeah. My father was a member of the Pullman Porters, under A. Philip Randolph, and rode those rails, as a Pullman Porter, and actually came into the subway system in New York City when there was, some struggle to have blacks integrate the New York City subway system. So he came in as a conductor.
And you came with him?
No, I wasn't born yet.
Oh, you were not born yet.
Okay. I wasn't even a thought yet.
Oh, not even a gleam in your daddy's eye.
Not even a gleam in my daddy's eyes. Yeah. But he came in as from the Pullman car porters, and he came in as a conductor. Okay. And then from a conductor, he became a motorman, and he was a motorman with the New York City Transit Authority for 37 years.
Okay.
My mother came up as people made those migrations from the South. Yeah. Her eldest sister came up first, and then the other sisters came up. Yeah. She came out of a family of 13 brothers and sisters and 5 half-brothers and sisters.
That was a big migration.
Big migration at that time.
It was a big sociological movement.
Absolutely. And she came up, and while she was here in New York, she met my father. They married, and I was the second of 3 children. Okay. I was born, I guess you call one of those post-war babies. Okay, right. I was born in 1946. Okay. Lived in Manhattan. Went to public school in Manhattan, and then in terms of those struggles to improve, we moved from Manhattan out to Queens, and Southeast Queens, and I went to finish public school there, junior high school. Then I went to Brooklyn Technical High School. Okay. I came out of Brooklyn Tech. I then went to Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. I came back.
Where'd you study there? It was undergraduate.
I started studying chemistry, and then I switched to political science. Okay. And then I came up and I matriculated at Hunter University in terms of this graduate school in urban planning.
Urban planning.
And basically, my course of study was, I guess, as from school, because, during school, as we talked a little bit earlier, I was certainly impacted by the civil rights movement.
Absolutely, as was all the world.
Absolutely, and the anti-war movement.
Right, also huge,
people from Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, used to visit Tennessee State's campus and discuss the war movement. Right. Certainly, I had an opportunity the first time. Later on, I chided him about it, but Kwame Ture at that time was Stokely Carmichael. The first time I ever saw or met Stokely Carmichael was at Tennessee State. He came to speak, and actually following me, I met Cleveland Sellers, who was another member of SNCC at that time. And they really...
let me just what year is it you're there in Tennessee?
66 through 70.
66, 62, 63, were you engaged in things that early in terms of civil rights, Rosa Parks, early on?
No.
You were busy academically.
I was busy academically. I was busy, I guess one would say, being informed and beginnings of consciousness, but not real activism. You know,
okay.
I
yeah,
followed.
Yeah, they can be different.
Yeah,
both
I
can be
followed.
legitimate. It's nice if they can be combined.
Yeah, I followed the course of I'm in school. You know, school. You discuss ideas.
Yes.
You know, and so like I said at that time, the ideas of the Black Power movement, civil rights, and the anti-war movement were ideas we debated all the time.
Well, as Bobby Dylan was saying, something was blowing in the wind, and it was, wasn't it? There was a big thing. A lot of the younger people did not realize just how there was a rend in the society along about 68, 69, 70.
Absolutely.
It was a major moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that was very important was for Black people at that time, their culture had not at that time come under the kind of assault it's come under now.
Really, that's interesting. Yeah.
And so, you know,
the Black folk getting too uppity.
Well, it wasn't so much. Well, I wouldn't say too much the question of their consciousness in the sense of their political, ideological consciousness, but in terms of the attack on the culture itself, how Black people treated each other, how Black people related to each other, how Black people identified with each other. Yeah, I would say that the nationalism of Black folks hadn't come under the tremendous attack it's come under now, particularly as you see, and we'll talk about it a little later, but at that time, you know, in school, you know, there were many streams and currents of thought that, and you know, in school, ideas are there, and so that goes hand in hand. Yeah. But always the question is whether those ideas actually then turn into you taking some action. You know, you know the old saying.
That's a biggie in philosophy and everything. I wonder if I could back up the family again a little bit. You were the first. I mean, you were the second of three. I was the baby. I had two older sisters. And then what I was wondering about the context within the family. Sometimes I think the family structure or the extended family or the aunts and uncles is maybe more important than even what goes on academically afterwards and so forth. But was it intellectually encouraging? Was it socially concerned, the dinner table talk and that kind of thing? Or was it a warm family setting? Or
it was.
And I don't mean to pry. It's just
well, no, it was a it was a supportive family structure.
Okay, good.
It was a supportive family structure. I was the second of three children in the middle. My mother and my father hadn't attended college. They had gone to some post-high school school, but not college.
And they both come out of the Deep South.
Came out of the Deep South. And so they were both, my mother and father were both supportive of the struggle for ideas. Whether that we necessarily agreed on all of them, they certainly understood the question that there were many new ideas out there.
But there was love in the air and everything amongst everybody. It was very nurturing, and it was very, good. I think that's important.
Absolutely, very supportive, nurturing, and the struggle to provide a way forward in that sense. You know, the traditional struggle for hopefully you to do better than we did. That kind of thing, and to be supportive of that. And so my older brother had gone, actually me going to Tennessee State, my older brother had gone there a year.
That's how you got there, maybe.
Yeah, it was. Happens. It was. I didn't even know Tennessee State existed until he went there. Then he transferred to Howard, and he went to Howard. And my
what did he study?
My older brother actually studied in school. He studied music at one time, and he actually studied biology. He studied biology and music, you know, and he's a musician. And he's a musician now.
Yeah, right. And I know you know a thing or two about music.
A little bit.
We'll get to that. Yeah, okay.
And my younger brother, he actually
all
stayed.
3 boys, right?
Yeah, 3 boys. Yeah. Yes. My younger brother stayed in the city. You know, he went to Pace University. Okay. And he studied business, but he was in the arts, and he formed a theater company. Okay, good. And to this day, he still is involved with that theater company. Theater and all that kind of stuff. That's good. So anyway, you got involved, and then you got the conscience and the action and that, and you're billed as part of the December 12 movement. Yes. And the International Secretariat thereof. Yes. Could you explain a little bit about the December 12 movement, what it is, how it got started, and its relevance in terms of understanding the evolution of the of the national consciousness, and particularly the Black consciousness? Well, one of the things I think
it's relevant.
Yes, I think one of the things that was very important for me was when I came out of school and I was in graduate school, I had an opportunity to meet some very significant and very important people that had a transforming effect on my life.
Stokely one of them?
Kwame was certainly one of them.
Yeah.
Probably one of the other most profound people I met was, at that time, was Viola Plummer.
Viola, I love Viola.
Yeah.
Give her my best
Yes,
regards.
absolutely.
Yes, right, yeah.
Was Viola Plummer,
Yeah.
who had a very long history
Yeah.
of involvement through the whole civil rights struggle, to the human rights struggle, to the struggle around the struggle for self-determination and black power.
And she knew about activism.
Absolutely.
And she's
Absolutely.
with Mr. Barron, I think,
Absolutely.
now. She's associated with Mr. Barron. Mr. Barron's a force of nature
Absolutely.
and things. Yeah.
And one of the other very important people I met was James Foreman.
Okay.
And I would say two of the people who had probably the most profound effect on my life was Viola and James Foreman.
Okay.
James Foreman, because he was a colossal thinker and activist, and a man of immense patience. And
it is a virtue.
And it is. And he was immensely patient with me.
Okay.
Because I had
That's
all
even a bigger
kinds of,
virtue.
please, I patted
Were you
him
a
on the
little
back.
bit headstrong, maybe?
Not only headstrong, but my head all over the place.
Yeah, right.
But I think his impact on me was from, I think, first and foremost, an ideological perspective.
Okay.
Jim Foreman had come through the civil rights movement. He had studied various ideological perspectives, integrated them into the question of how they can be meaningful for transforming the conditions of black people. He had been involved in the forming of a revolutionary workers movement in Detroit.
That's where I'm from, incidentally. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Yeah. First he had come through civil rights, through SNCC. And he had become, as he wrote in his book, The Making of a Black Revolutionary, you could see his transformation and evolution into a revolutionary.
A revolutionary.
And so...
Would you count yourself a revolutionary?
Absolutely.
You would, okay.
Absolutely.
And Viola would call
absolutely.
that. And Stokely was that.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
We could name someone. Was Martin King a revolutionary?
Malcolm
X a revolutionary?
Malcolm X was a revolutionary. Martin Luther King was basically a reformist, but a hell of a reformist.
Yeah, a hell of a reformist, and he had great patience.
Absolutely.
But he also got a little bit, and he also had a heck of a time getting him to relate to the Vietnam War, if I remember right. Finally he did, and when he did, it was a thunderstroke.
And probably laid the basis for his assassination.
I would think it might well be, because the feelings were running so high then.
And his influence was so broad and spread so far. In terms of that.
Yeah.
But Foreman, but Jim Foreman was unique in the sense that his experiences had transformed him, and he was a teacher par excellence. In fact, if there are two people, not only was I influenced by Jim Foreman and Viola, but I think probably one of their strongest assets is their ability to teach, to be teachers. And as you know, in terms of school, there are many people who taught you, but very few that you consider to be master teachers. And you know them when you look back at those ones who just captivated you.
Yeah, they have an influence on you, or even people that you're not in immediate contact with, but they influence your thinking.
Absolutely.
Who have been some of the major people who have influenced your thinking, let's say, outside of the immediate civil rights leadership and so forth, which was emerging, but in a broader philosophical sense and so forth? Say in the realm of economic theory, would you have been cottoning on to Mr. Marx? Would you have been cottoning on to, or your economic philosophy?
Absolutely Marx. You know, absolutely Marx. Certainly the relationship to Marx first starts from the first struggle for whether you're going to have a materialist analysis of the world.
That's a big
your world
issue.
Outlook.
Right, and you do see things dialectically?
Absolutely. Jim Foreman was profound in his ability to teach that. Where do ideas come from? You know, the struggle is Chinese, the struggle of the Vietnamese, the struggle in the national liberation struggles, because you know, the anti-communist boogeyman, you know, was always permeated, you know, this country, and there had been historically bad experiences between that movement and the black liberation movement.
Absolutely. COINTELPRO, remember COINTELPRO?
Absolutely. But one of the things, facts are stubborn things.
Yes.
And, you know, when you're struggling to transform conditions and you have to deal with things that actually analyze those conditions. And so in that sense, Foreman was very influential in the sense of, first, his experience,
right,
and then the things that transformed him to begin to not look at things from whether what someone else said.
right.
And that was one of his strongest points. Don't read what someone else said about somebody.
No.
Read what they said.
You can be informed by it.
Informed by it,
your own.
but first,
Yeah.
you have to have a sense of what did they say.
Right.
What do you think about it?
But
if you get the interpretation of someone else
right.
from someone else,
Yeah.
then you're getting their interpretation of that person.
That's right.
You have a mind of
Now,
your
there's
own.
a place for that.
Yeah.
You can be informing things and everything.
Oh, no. In fact, actually,
you can read from history.
Actually, that
Yeah.
might be a way that you might, in fact, even know about something.
Right, right.
But he was always a very strong advocate. But read the person. Don't let someone tell you.
Did you say meet the person?
No. Read the person. Read the person.
It might be good also to meet them in person to get the nuance.
And absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in that sense, Foreman had a very strong ideological impact on me, just in terms of his own experiences in the civil rights movement, his teaching ability. I can remember traveling with him to Epps, Alabama, where the Southern Development Co-op was organizing Mississippi poultry workers who were working under some most horrendous conditions in poultry plants.
Yeah. It's still going on.
Absolutely.
That's another issue for me. I don't think it's unconscionable the way they treat the birds, for one thing.
Yeah, but
it's horrible.
The working conditions, not only in terms of the treatment of the animals, but the people.
Yeah.
And Foreman, I went down with him, and he did a lecture to the women who were working there on the question of surplus value and where it comes
surplus
from.
Labor theory of value.
Labor theory of value. And I sat there mesmerized at how he broke down the essence of their role in history and why they were so important to the transformation of our very being and the uniqueness of where they were.
They were as poultry workers.
Yes, as poultry workers.
But I wanted to back up a little bit and say the labor theory of value itself. And then not only that, the surplus labor theory, because you were talking about the philosophical groundwork by which you get the ideas that can inform your activism.
Yes.
And the labor theory of value is an important one. Maybe you could just spell it out a little bit. You learned from Mr. Foreman or from your own experience. The labor theory of value, and maybe even more than that, the surplus labor theory of value as a valid way of understanding the evolution of economic relationships between the various classes of people within a world culture.
Well, that lecture was very significant for me in terms of his ability to break down something that on its surface seemed very complex, but yet for these people, it really spelled out for them their centrality. The poultry workers, so their centrality.
I meant the
I'm gonna get to
Okay.
And so as he explaining it to them, he was getting them to really understand the fact that the poultry plant, the owner of the poultry plant, the ability for them to set up the plant. The real question was, there's an assumption that everything is equal, that everything that goes in comes out equal, that everybody's paid a fair and equal amount for what goes in and what comes out.
Everything's copacetic.
Everything's copacetic. And they said, but then if that's the question, then where does his profit come from? Where does that happen from? And he really explained to them the question around that once you take yourself and understand that you're not looked at as a human being, you're looked at as a commodity. You're looked at as a commodity.
Well, the society in general is looked at as a commodity by the business community.
By the business community. And as a worker, your centrality as a commodity is very unique because you're a commodity different than any other commodity. Because in you, you create and you're the sole source of surplus value. And
that's the assumption.
That's
surplus value.
Surplus value.
Yeah, they said that all production is done through labor's thing, and that the surplus is like congealed labor.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely. Well, when it's socialized, absolutely, in a social setting. But for him to explain to them to get understand that, you know, when you start your work week out, the assumption is everything is equal. That what goes in terms of paying for the materials, paying the rent, paying the depreciation on the machines, all of this goes equal, and that so when you come out of that week of production, that what you get is actually an expression of what you've actually put in. And you know, then he began to explain to them, well, then if that's the question, then now let's get at then where does his profit come from?
Yeah.
If everything is equal, where does his profit come from? And
right.
then he went to explain the uniqueness of them as workers.
He's explaining that to poultry workers, but it is informed from the surplus labor theory of value from Mr. Marx and Engels.
Absolutely.
And by Hegel?
Absolutely, absolutely, Hegelian.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And he's trying to get them to, and very successfully, to understand that even in their condition, that condition is an expression of their oppression.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that condition is also the source of wealth. And and it has a...
And that's a socialistic argument for the organizing world society.
And it has an
It still resonates as irrelevant.
Because it's still relevant. And it has a redeeming effect to people because it begins to, as I said, their centrality to the importance of what goes on transforms. And then you begin to see that the issue is not what you produce, the issue is not surplus value. The issue is who controls it, and then what benefits are wrought from it, and whether it's accumulated by them for their own luxury.
Called capital accumulation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If it's
but
used
that's
for
also where the investment comes for new plant and equipment. Comes from that, does it not?
It all comes from that.
Yeah, okay.
It all comes from that.
Yeah, right.
It all comes from that. And so,
then
it was a very big experience
for
me, not only in the question of, coming from school, the question of, ideas.
Yeah, right.
But it was a question of taking those ideas to the place where they have the most transforming effect. And,
like a poultry factory.
As a poultry factory and a poultry worker.
Or Martha Ray.
Who gets up at 4 o'clock. Martha Ray. Right.
Was it Martha Ray? Was that? No, she was a comedian or something.
No, not Martha Ray.
Yeah, you know what I mean. The movie where she says strike, and we know what we're talking about. We can't get the name for it, but the principle's there that people will know. Yeah. And the union movement and the labor movement in general in the world society.
Absolutely. And for them to understand that this philosophy and economic theory was very germane for their understanding of their role and the redeeming effect of that. And so for me, coming from school and background like that, it's one thing to talk about observing the world, as you know, and it's another thing to talk about changing it.
Right.
And so that was very impactful for me.
Is it important that you know that you have that basic grounding of understanding certain principles, say ideology maybe, in order to inform your action? Or is it just there's so much injustice? You can see injustice or an unjust situation in virtually everywhere you look in terms of what let's say maybe what the future requires. We don't have a system of operating this planet Earth that is relevant, is relating to the way the future requires. There's still a tremendous qualitative change that has to occur, but isn't it good to have that grounded in some sort of an ideological basis?
Oh yeah, and
so that it's not just anarchistic or just lashing out against injustice emotionally or something, but it's grounded intellectually.
It's grounded intellectually. It's not only grounded intellectually, it's grounded with those members of the most advanced class that can advance those ideas in a very practical.
Who are the advanced class of people who can do it? The workers.
Workers.
They can be their own spokespeople. It comes out of them.
Well, it comes.
A lot of it came from people of the top.
It certainly comes from outside of them.
Wow.
But it's nurturing ground and its resting place in terms of relevance takes place with them. And I think as one says that you may have social change and revolution. You can have ideas that talk about that, and they may not produce what you want.
Yeah.
But very seldom do you ever have a revolution that is not guided by some kind of ideas in terms of that.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, that's not guided by that.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's one thing to talk about what you're against.
Yeah.
It's another thing to talk about what you are for.
Yeah, no. There's a lot of that, isn't there? Because there's so much dysfunction in world society in terms of a just order. And so it's very easy to find something to be very much against the way things are, but to come up with an alternative that is relevant to what the future requires is another matter.
And, one of the things that has been very successful about the current capitalist society is that in its most degenerative state, one of the things that it has sought to accomplish is to disrupt the continuity of thought. To have people, to have people as if they're starting from scratch and not building on top of something. You know, that continuity is very important because without the continuity, you can separate generations and make it that they're old people and young people, as opposed to the continuity of a people.
Absolutely, and that's a divide and conquer kind of thing by the people who run things, don't you think? And
that's why the X generation, the Pepsi generation, is the hip hop. Is to create that this is something that's diametrically, or the dichotomy is so, as opposed to here we are. If we look back in terms of for black people in this country, here we are. And so here we are now. And so what has been the transforming things for us, what have been the stops along the way, the detours along the way, and have we accomplished our mission? And so during that course of time, you get all kinds of false ideas that, well, it's really this over here and it's really that over there. And it's really attempts to blunt us standing on the shoulders of the ones before us until we accomplish our task.
Yeah, people who are of a retroactive nature and everything can try to stand on the shoulders of people who were oppressive. And coming out and celebrate people who were really oppressive and within an oppressive context, accepting an oppressive context in terms of what the future. Are things getting better through time?
I think things are coming closer.
In terms of political justice, let's say, for inclusive of everybody and so forth, rather than some group that controls everything. I guess in Rome they had emperors. Most of the people were close to being slaves. On feudal estates, the serfs were like slaves. I think in the terms of the modern world, a few people own all the assets and set the template by and large. And we're still like serfs on a feudal estate in a certain real sense in terms of capability.
As they say, wage slaves is still a form of slavery.
It's still an appropriate title for most of the people because that's the only way they have to get income, for one thing.
Absolutely. I think the other thing too is that
demand.
I think the other thing too is that it's a tremendous amount of control of the media, of ideas as such. But still, in spite of all of that, the transforming factor is the people themselves, the people to make their own history, the creators of history, the movers of history. And you begin to see in this period, certainly,
you're talking civil rights in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Well, I'm talking about if we just look at it in terms of its transformation, the transformations that it's gone through to now. That one of the targets of any movement that's for revolutionary or social change is the leadership and the ideas they expounded. However, one of the things they can't change is the reality of the problems of the system that they have.
Thank you very much.
So because of that, you look in Central America, South America. You look, during the 60s, we had the period of the tremendous amount of the African liberation struggles, the struggles in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and you look at the co-optation of some of those. The setbacks.
Allende, Arbenz, there's a whole lay of things where the
setbacks in El Salvador. But however, on the other hand, you see the reemergence of the impossibility of people to be able to live under the conditions that they're living under.
And
when
it
the
becomes intolerable.
It becomes absolutely intolerable. And so now you see the emergence of new mass movements for change, for relief, for resources that are the embodiment and the right of the people who live there being exploited.
Do you ever see it like a gestation? History is like one of my favorite lines, people who heard me are sick of hearing it, but it's James Joyce saying, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. Do you think things are getting better? We used to have chattel slavery, remember? And we used to wipe out the Indian tribes with great abandon, and they were thought of, things are not as bad as they were. There is some progress being made. No?
Well, I would say this. I would say that we're closer to the point of being able to resolve the issues for mankind
collectively
than we have been.
And if we say we're going to resolve the problems, does that mean collectively for everybody? That would be for the masses of the oppressed people.
It would be the masses of
oppressed people. But it would also be now increasingly the ecology within the context within which we live. But would we ever get to a point where we'd have a system that was so comprehensively appropriate to the evolution of events and institutions and so forth, that it would also be able to include those who are responsible for the outdated institutions that formulate the current leadership of people who have great political power and influence on the world, that they could be included without rolling out the guillotines and things like that. If you understand, revolution is a big word.
I understand exactly.
But it'd be inclusive of everybody.
Well, no, I understand exactly what you say. Yeah. I think the question is, we can't foretell that.
Yeah, right.
How events will unfold.
Right.
One of the things we do know is with the correct leadership, the correct timing, events will unfold. Now, to the degree that you speak of, what will be acceptable, what will be able to be accepted, is always tied to the question of change and who's willing to change. I mean, one of the issues is, one of the issues is, look at the question of the economic crisis that we're going through now.
We've been hit upside the head like a mule in Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to sell, American democracy and capitalism around the world has taken a very big hit.
It sure as hell has.
And
it opens the way for thinking anew.
Absolutely.
Or introducing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. However, those folks who are so attached to their privilege and their right to access untold amounts of wealth to maintain themselves.
The aristos in Versailles?
The nouveau, the nouveau.
Well, no, I was thinking of 1789 when they made a revolution in France.
And, I'm just saying, we could say
powdered wigs and things, you know.
Yes, and the different forms it takes now. But I'm saying I think the key thing is that we'll see how events unfold. One of the things we do know, though, is that it is impossible for people to live when enormous amounts of wealth that are created by them are just sucked out of them, and to the point of where they are accumulated and not utilized for the people.
That's right, and it also becomes
healthcare, housing, education, all of these things take a hit, where people simply die because they don't have access to all of the things they are to live.
That's right.
And so,
while others live in condos in the sky. 8-star condos in the sky and looking
empty
for
ones,
10.
And looking for new.
Empty of spirit, too, often. All of that.
And destroying the planet, as
and
you
destroying
say.
the planet in the bargain. And listen, one of the problems is we have a whole hour. I could talk to you for 18 hours with no problem. We're going to do it on another occasion. But I have a responsibility because you are also Friends of Zimbabwe. You're with the Friends of Zimbabwe. I want to talk a little bit about that because we have a mutual friend, Ali Traki, and I also like and have been very much positively influenced by Muammar Gaddafi out of Libya. I personally think that he's got some really interesting views about the way the world's going to be working. He's now come out of the cold and so forth, and they're setting up the African Union, and they're setting up the United States of Africa. A great idea. It makes Kwame Ture and Kwame Nkrumah cheer from the sidelines and so forth. But you've got that, and you've got a piece of tape with Mr. Mugabe, as I think. I want to make sure we get that in, and also maybe introduce to the audience the Friends of Zimbabwe and the implications in terms of what we've been talking.
Just very quickly, one of the things that very early on, since 1972, when there was a tremendous rally in the United States around African liberation, and it was in Washington, D.C. But what it did, it put on the agenda a continuation of our understanding of black people's relationship to Africa and to the African liberation struggles. And out of that, we were very familiar with many of the liberation movements. One of those movements is Africa's threw off colonialism
Zimbabwe.
was Southern Africa.
Oh, that was
from the Portuguese colonies to Namibia, the former German protectorate, quote protectorate, to South Africa, and to Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And Zimbabwe being
Southern Rhodesia,
called Rhodesia, Ian Smith,
hanging in like that.
You know, Cecil Rhodes' view of
Cecil Rhodes. I read a biography of Cecil Rhodes. Talk about racism, man.
Cairo, from the Cape to Cairo. He just planned an enormous empire built on the backs of people of color for the wealth of Europe.
Outright. And you look in the 19th century, the thing toward the Chinese and toward the blacks and toward the, it was just so
blatant.
thick. It was blatant.
It was just blatant.
Anyway, but
But so during that time, one of the groups, liberation movements that we very much supported was the struggle in Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia. For them, one of the latter struggles too, for them to liberate themselves from the minority white government there that had declared themselves unilaterally independent of Britain and everybody.
With sovereignty.
With sovereignty.
For the people there.
And their position was, as Ian Smith said, we will rule here for 1,000 years.
And remember, they called Nelson Mandela a terrorist for borrowing to say we got to make changes.
But ZANU-PF and ZAPU, which were the two liberation movements in Zimbabwe, united, and they successfully won their independence. And one of the things that was very fundamental to them that they went to war about was their right to regain their land. Very big issue across Africa.
And Mr. Mugabe was
in Kenya, of course, with Jomo Kenyatta and the Kikuyu struggle.
And you had you had Mr. Mugabe in Rhodesia. And you had Mr. Kenneth Kaunda in northern Rhodesia, were liberation fighters.
Was in Zambia, right?
Yeah, in Zambia.
And Jomo and Joshua Nkomo, who was the other movement in
it was
Zimbabwe.
part of a larger movement that was going on. But
in Southern Africa,
particularly was a leader of that movement.
Absolutely.
And now you got so you're friends of Zimbabwe.
Our friends of Zimbabwe campaign and movement is one of our slogans is Mugabe is right.
Okay,
and that the attacks on Zimbabwe are the natural reflection of when a people not only want independence in the political sphere, but now seek in the economic sphere. And as Kwame Nkrumah said, the first motion in Africa was for the political kingdom. But the political kingdom will come to naught without the economic kingdom.
They got to go. It used to be called political economy,
absolutely.
didn't it?
Always still does.
Yeah,
always,
it still does.
It's always still
and everything
relevant.
is under
Absolutely.
And I noted, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know it well and everything, but I think 85% of the good land and so forth in Zimbabwe was owned by white settlers.
Absolutely.
And if I looked at it more recently, less than a few years ago, 85% of the land was owned by white settlers or controlled by them in terms of Zimbabwe. I may be off base on that. But that's a basic problem that seems never to come up.
Well,
if you understand.
Yes, and it never comes up because of the media and how it's portrayed. The reality,
because that's owned by
the reality is
surplus value of the assets that the big power people have to do propaganda campaigns and hoodwink the people of the world.
And so when people search for ideas and for understanding what's going on, if your only source of information is the same media that is the beneficiary of those resources.
Thank God for public access.
To at least hear another idea, WBAI, and public access television. But the reality is in Zimbabwe is that there's a fundamental issue. The issue is Africans took back their land. Until they took back their land, Zimbabwe was, quote, tolerable. Once they made a decision, which started with the indigenous Zimbabweans saying, we didn't go to war simply to get a parliament. Parliament. We were ruling ourselves long before that. We went to war to get back what was stolen from us and our ancestors. And the minute that hit the agenda,
that cannot be.
Not only is it an issue in Zimbabwe, it's an issue across Africa, it's an issue in Central and South America, in the world. And colonialism meant the theft of resources and land.
For the benefit of the thieves.
Absolutely. Independence means the reacclimation and restitution to the people of their political rights, which cannot go on with any longevity without the economic rights. And so the attack on Mugabe, the creation of opposition, are comes right off the Central Intelligence or the M16 drawing boards.
Hello, Langley. Are you listening?
Right.
Langley, tune in. Yeah.
Comes right off of those drawing boards of how to destabilize a country, how to make your friends enemies and your enemies friends.
They did it with Mossadegh in Iran, and I think we ought to keep that in mind about the current situation that resonates. Arbenz in Guatemala, Cuba. They did it with Allende in Chile, and they do it like that. So it's just part of the larger pattern. Now we have a little speech of his that you brought in, right?
Yes, this is him speaking at the United Nations.
And we're going to run about 5 minutes or so of this speech. You can't run the whole thing; it's too long. But we're going to run 5 or 6 minutes of the program with him, and we're talking. So why don't we set that up in the booth and run that, and then we're coming back, and we'll be coming back, Mr. Clay, in a moment. Let's run that tape now, then, Willie, please. And I hope it just comes out. There it is. Okay, and pump it in here, please.
Your Excellency, Mr. Miguel Descoto, President of the 63rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Your Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. Mr. President, I wish to begin by joining those who have congratulated you on your election as President of the 63rd session of the General Assembly. My delegation is confident that under your able stewardship, the General Assembly will make progress on many issues due for discussion during the current session. I would also like to pay special tribute to your predecessor, Mr. Kerim, who successfully presided over this 62nd session of the General Assembly. Mr. President, our discussion focus this session, namely the impact of the global food crisis on poverty and hunger in the world, as well as the need to democratize the United Nations, relates well to our Millennium Development Goals. For us in the developing world, the eradication of poverty is the first of our priorities and should indeed continue to receive serious attention. The current global food crisis, characterized by escalating food prices, is causing untold suffering to the majority of poor people in many developing countries. This has been compounded by the energy crisis, with devastating social economic consequences, especially on the most vulnerable in society, such as women, children, the elderly, as well as people living with HIV and AIDS. The crisis now qualifies as a humanitarian emergency, which requires global solidarity to provide post-haste assistance in the form of food, water, and energy. Mr. President, for most developing countries, the crisis is competing with other pressing demands for scarce resources for development, including achieving the Millennium Development Goals, especially as we are faced with declining official development assistance and foreign direct investment. The trend will regrettably reverse some of the progress made towards attainment of the MDGs. It is therefore crucial that national efforts aimed at addressing this global food and energy crisis be complemented by appropriate international assistance and interventions, including debt cancellations for low-income, food-deficient developing countries, so as to release more resources to fight hunger. Adequate support for food production programs is absolutely necessary. We call for more research into better seed varieties and assistance in irrigation technology and improved water harvesting methods necessary to mitigate the effects of climate change on agriculture. Zimbabwe believes that the challenges of climate change should be addressed in the context of development programs that recognize the three pillars of economic and social trusts, as well as environmental protection.
Okay, that's really good, and everything is like that. That's really interesting, and he's laying that out is there, and I think the situation is the historical context. And it's worth mentioning perhaps now that our friend, mutual friend, Ali Traki, who's been 12 years the ambassador from Libya to the United Nations and has been spending the last 4 or 5 years as the chief minister from the country of Libya in the north, for the African continent, along with, and they've formed the African Union now in terms of the 54 or 53 countries that constitute Africa, including the Mediterranean. He has now been elected unanimously as the President of the General Assembly for the upcoming session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. And I think that is a good harbinger, and he's informed us that for the first time ever, Mu-Ammar Gaddafi, who I think, and Kwame Ture thought, I know, because we met often there, had a vision for the future organization of the world that is really worth taking into account in a model kind of way, similar to which the United States of America may have been as bumpkins across the ocean, or to the aristos in Europe that had lived for 1,000 years under feudalism. There was the steam engine, industrialization, things coming. He may have a model relevant to what the world needs in terms of political and economic organization, which the future needs, which the old order is busy reifying outdated institutions. So in that sense, they might represent an ancien regime in a sense of the aristos from Europe in 1789. And he is now going to, for the first time, we did the program with Ali Traki here, and Mr. Gaddafi had visited for the first time the country of Italy, set up a tent in one of the largest.
He generally does.
One of the largest parks there, had all women as his bodyguard. Very interesting fellow, but he had never been there, and he did have on his coat Omar Mokhtar, who was the great resistance leader in Libya to the occupation by the country, the colonial occupation of Italy, which involved, as Ali Traki has informed us, something like 1/2 of the total population of Libya had been ruthlessly wiped out. Concentration camps, the whole thing, by Italian colonization. And he hadn't been able to do it because he's now coming into great prominence, and he's taken great attention to Africa. They now have the African Union, and they've now also proposed that there be established, and they're in the process of doing it, a entity called the United States of Africa. So I think it bodes, and Mr. Gaddafi, will for the first time ever be addressing the General Assembly, and for the first time ever coming to New York.
I understand.
And I think his influence may be on the rise, as he's now got diplomatic relations and all that sort of thing, having met the things that were put in front of him to do that. And I just think that resonates in terms of the interests of Africa. And I think Mr. Mugabe has been in touch with Mr. Gaddafi and that sort of thing. And so it's just a little bit of the frame of reference in which things are developing in the African continent and the broader world.
Yeah, currently, Muammar Gaddafi is the chairperson of the African Union.
That's right.
He was just recently elected to that, and he's serving that term. And in 2007, I was in Ghana at the African Union, where the only discussion for that African Union was on the United States of Africa. And so
I'm happy to hear. That's Kwame Nkrumah territory.
Yes, absolutely.
We were the Pan-Africanists at the get-go.
And I had not been to Ghana in almost 30 years, and it was a tremendous experience for me to come back to Ghana and to see the mausoleum where Nkrumah is buried, and his wife was buried there just a year before that. But at that session that went on, they really tackled the discussions around the United States of Africa, which is logical. The world is developing into regional economic blocks.
You have the European Union, don't you? You got the United States of America,
Southeast Asia. So it's logical.
And they've been roundly ignored in any positive way, the continent of Africa, except as a place to exploit by the Western powers, and maybe something new can come.
Absolutely. And so the United States of Africa is as Kwame Nkrumah said, the Organization of African Unity, first mission was to gain political independence for African countries in the battle against colonialism. But the African Union's development was specifically tied to now the economic development of African countries, which speaks to the attack against neocolonialism. You know, and in that sense, the United States of Africa is a logical progression of a unity that is built on a higher level of respect and mutual interest, and really takes a real critical look at the boundaries and divisions that exist in Africa, which were mandated and militarily forced on Africans in terms of not only Rhodes, but all of the French, the Portuguese, to divide Africa, as they did in the Berlin Conference, based on spheres of influence.
Or the Ottoman Empire after 22.
Yes, and you divide them. Tribal nations were divided in half. You're in this country, you're in that country. So the United States
at the behest of the European overlords.
So the United States of Africa is certainly a goal that's on the immediate agenda to make Africa competitive in a constantly changing world with as much resources as Africa have, then to be able to negotiate their development not from a point of weakness but from a point of strength.
Would be good.
The issues that are involved, though, are the questions of what's the road forward to do it. It has often been portrayed recently that you have the gradualists on the one hand, and you have on the other hand the people who want to do it immediately. And then you kind of juxtapose those to different arguments for each one. I think the African Union and the leadership there have taken a very strategic view. One, that it must happen, number one.
There's a change the future requires.
Number two, process-wise, there's some things that we know that have to happen in terms of international boundaries, in terms of currencies, in terms of language. And so probably the route that will be taken will probably be regional blocks that will then merge into that. But it's on the agenda. Every African Union meeting, there have been a committee that's tasked to work on structure. There's some inter-African organizations that have been set up that haven't done what they were supposed to do. So there's some critiques of those things because you can't move to a bigger step if you haven't really worked out some other things. So these things are going on, but I think
we were talking about the underlying intellectual understanding of an active movement.
Yes.
We maybe don't have the vision we need adequately yet to what is going to deal with the future that the future requires.
Well, I think the
level of vision, or do we?
No,
do we have it? And if we do, who embodies it?
I think
what country embodies it?
I think the vision is there by a very clear understanding of the necessity of unity on a continental basis.
Continental, not planetary?
Well, first continental. Everything's first is national.
You think so?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Nation state is the basic.
I'm saying everything first starts nationally.
Okay.
It starts nationally.
Okay.
And for the continent of Africa, when you have countries that are newly emerging nations, the idea of giving up their sovereignty that they've only had in a short amount of time becomes some of the obstacles.
I would think so.
However, at the same time, you have the contradiction that many of those same nations that are gaining their sovereignty were nations that were falsely created in the first place with false divisions.
Or you've got some, it might be, we could just go a little bit abroad from Africa, although that's relevant, the current thing in Iran. I mean, you had a neo-colonial thing in the view of many people of a 5,000-year-old culture that was there under the Shah. And that was a major, there was a major thing when Mossadegh, who had been really elected democratically by everybody, was ruthlessly by Kermit Roosevelt. Right. They negotiated at Langley. The people who are probably listening in now, they did it, and that should be understood there, so that the thing in Iran or in the Islamic world is not recognized. That's the enemy. It used to be the communists were the enemy.
Now it's the Islamic fundamentalists.
Arab or fundamental Arab.
All covers for stealing resources. All covers for stealing. But in terms of back to Africa, the clip that people saw on President Mugabe, I think it's important to demystify, to de-demonize President Mugabe. President Mugabe is a revolutionary. He spent a number of years in jail, 11 years in jail. He's a scholar. He's a leader. He led a military liberation movement.
Right, like Kaunda did in what was
absolutely.
Zambia, or Northern,
He stands on the shoulders of people like Samora Machel, Patrice Lumumba, in terms of that. And these are folks who had the vision for Africa. But as we said, without economic kingdom, the political kingdom will come to naught. So President Mugabe is demonized by the same people who want to discuss democracy in Zimbabwe, who are the same ones who are opposed to democracy in Zimbabwe.
That's right.
And so at some point it becomes insulting.
Yeah, they'll say he can't handle it, so we're going to have somebody there that can, and it's because he can't handle it. Inherent in that is a certain view of the world.
And see, and this is very important to even understand with the United States of Africa. Through sanctions against countries that defy the powers that be because of their desire to be sovereign. Just the idea I have the right to be sovereign.
That's right.
Are punished through sanctions.
Yeah.
On the other hand, in terms of a continent that seeks to unite, they use bilateral or unilateral economic agreements to supersede the ability for Africans to jointly create continental economic agreements. So they're busy trying to set up economic agreements with individual countries, which will try to undermine that by the United States of Africa.
And they'll say, or the powers that be will say, well, look, we got atomic weapons that can destroy the species. We've got them and everything, but you can't even develop the possibility of doing that. They had, in Iraq, they had a thing where a dual use, they took pencils. You couldn't do the pencils that might be made into gunpowder that might attack our hegemonic control over you. You stayed backward. You stay back. You do that. Let us educate.
And yet Israel's atomic and hydrogen bombs are not even up for discussion.
No, that's right.
It's not even. They're talking about North Korea's right to nuclear energy. At the same time, they do not discuss that Israel continues to build and test at their scientific levels.
Yeah, but that's because
they're part and parcel of Western.
Israel's turning into apartheid. They got that wall. It's turning into apartheid. They ought to be say, tear down this wall, Mr. Netanyahu, or something.
Israel is a military.
And we are joined to Israel at the hip.
Absolutely. Israel is a military outpost for the West in the Arab world.
It's like
Africa.
On the frontier, in the Indian thing, no good engine, but dead engine, or do them in, and that kind of an attitude. And we should not be allowed. We should be making a real understanding of the scholarship and so forth within the Islamic world, because they deal with the interest of usury. Still, they deal with that. We've gotten around that and made our system build like that. But we haven't yet come up with an economic system the future requires. We have to do it. And if I think we're going to do it, it's going to take the work of people like yourself. One problem is we run out of time. Really interesting. Thanks a lot for coming in. It's your
pleasure to come.
To have Omowale Clay and he's a December 12th movement and Friends of Zimbabwe, and you can see has a lot of very interesting friends. Keep up all the good work, and we'll be watching Mr. Muammar Gaddafi talking to the General Assembly, and also I'd expect Mr. Ahmadinejad will be discussing that as well, and we ought to listen to both.
President Mugabe.
And President Mugabe. Okay, thank you for viewing. Your pleasure, please. We'll be coming back again tomorrow.